Welcome to the Soul Grit podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. I want to say welcome today to Christine Virtue, who is a longtime friend and mentor to me. She was part of a campus ministry that I was involved in college. And so when I was I think I met you when I was 19. You came on board when I was a freshman, and I went to your wedding at 19 years old. You didn't know me yet. I knew your husband first. And then after that, you became my Bible study leader and discipler during my sophomore year and moving forward. So this has been, I won't say exactly how many years that has been, but I'm thinking around 20 years ago that I met you. So Christine, I'm going to have you introduce yourself in a minute, but that's how I know you. So what would you like to tell people about yourself?
Well, thanks, Ann. I appreciate reconnecting with you and Matt also and your family. It's really, I think what's encouraging to me is to see how you guys are still living out your faith, and not just living out your faith, but you really have a heart to serve people, to share the gospel. And that's been really encouraging to me. But like Ann said, my husband and I, we've been on staff for 21 years with Campus Crusade for Christ, or it's now called Cru. We have 3 kids, one who is 16 and just got her driver's license yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
I know, big moment. My son, Colin, is 13, and then my youngest, Kaylin, is 10. And we have been on staff, like I said, for 21 years, but the last 8 years we have been serving in the Philippines at the International Graduate School of Leadership, which is a Cru-based seminary for missionaries and pastors to get their degree, so their MDiv or their master's in transformational leadership. And what makes us a unique school is our students come as families, and so we build into the whole family. And so I am the director of the women's program. And so on Mondays, the wives come to the husbands stay home and watch the kids, and the wives come to class, and we do everything from parenting classes, marriage classes, studying the Old and New Testament, God's story, soul care. We do, so basically the wives get 2 years of biblical training and parenting training and all those things while they're with us.
That's amazing. I know that you and I both really have a heart for women. So you've been launched into this amazing transformational journey of helping other women, not just as mothers and wives, but as partners in ministry. I think that's the name of the program, right? Partners in Ministry. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, no, it's cool because as I was starting to say before, Christine, you're the person that taught me how to disciple women and how to lead a girls' Bible study, and how to have those kinds of relationships where you get to share your faith in relationship. So thank you for doing that. And then for following this call. It must have been pretty intense. I can't believe it's been 8 years, but to move your family away from California to an island where you don't know anybody, where the culture is completely different. And I think you told me at your program you have people from 25 different countries?
Yes, from all over Asia. So Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka. It's been a learning curve to learn, the different cultural needs and values of the different families we work with. But it's been an honor and a privilege to work with these women and figure out ways to empower them in their marriages, in their relationship with their children, and in ministry. Yeah. So it's been a really neat opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you're back stateside right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about what brought you back to California for the time being?
Yes, our family has been back since late September, and that's mainly because of the pandemic, because of COVID. The Philippines has handled it different than the U.S. We went on lockdown in the Philippines in March, I think March 16th. We
Mhm.
went into what they called enhanced community quarantine. And that meant we had to stay in our houses. Only one adult was allowed out of the house to go get essential goods. Children still to this day, 18 and below, are not allowed out of the house. And adults 65 and older are still not allowed out of the house due to COVID.
Mhm.
And so we realized that we were kind of living in jail in our house in
Mhm.
Manila. And so we came back to the US, and my kids are still doing online school with their school in the Philippines. And
Mhm.
we are still teaching at our school because everything's online now, but
Yeah.
we've been back due to COVID.
Yeah. So I think you told me, what was the big outing for your kids during lockdown?
So
Usually.
during lockdown, since they weren't allowed out, we would sneak them. And the big outing was to go through the drive-through at McDonald's or Starbucks. That was the big outing. And they would duck in the back of the car when we go through the guard gate, so the guards wouldn't see them in the car, so we could just get them out of the house.
That's so crazy. So just really, really restrictive for families. Like not so bad for people who are like our age, adults, but for families that was really hard. So you had to consider that for your kiddos.
For sure. And it's still hard to watch because it's still, as of now, schools are not opening in the Philippines. Kids are still not allowed out of the house.
Hmm.
So we're really trying to discern what does God have for us in the next few months.
Yeah.
It's especially hard as things are opening up here and we're watching it actually get
Hmm.
worse there. So
Hmm.
it's,
So
yeah.
you spent the first 6 months of the pandemic living in those conditions.
Yes.
What was that like for you emotionally?
I think initially when we first went into lockdown, I think like many of us, I was kind of like looking forward to all my family together for the first few weeks, and not having to commute, because commuting's really challenging. The
Yeah.
traffic is horrible in the Philippines. So suddenly we weren't commuting and all my family was together. And I think for the first few weeks, I kind of enjoyed it. But the day that, I don't know, then things started to get more real, and the reality began to set in as the embassy was sending planes for Americans to get us out of the country. So
Mm.
that was kind of a unique thing that I've never experienced before. And it was scary too, because you were like, wow, they're sending planes for us. Like, should we be getting on it?
Mhm.
Should we go? But my lowest moment was at that point. I thought, because why we were serving in the Philippines was education, I didn't think we would be that impacted.
Mhm.
But like I said, our students were from all over Asia, and they live on a small compound. Like, they all
Mhm.
live in dorms on campus. And so our board decided that it was best if we sent our students home. And this was after about 2 months of our students not being able to leave campus. So at
Mm.
that point, food was being brought in for them. All their essential goods were being brought to them on campus. They weren't leaving the compound because it was kind of built into our minds that it was dangerous to leave. Like, it's really
Yeah.
threatening out there. Don't leave.
Mhm.
Um, and so a really low moment for me was when, on a big Zoom with all our students, the president of the school told our students, we're sending you home. You have
Mm.
to go back to your countries because of COVID. Like, we're not going to reopen. We're going to go online and you have to go home. And I remember one of the young moms that was in one of my classes, she undid her mic and she just said, I just had a baby and you're sending me out there. You're sending me into this world of COVID. And it was just heartbreaking.
That's so
And
scary.
it was scary. It was sad. It was overwhelming. And I just found myself going into a depression, because I
Mhm.
just felt like, my gosh, I'm scared. I don't know. Should we be going back to the US? Should we be staying? We're sending our students home. What if we get COVID here? What does that
Mhm.
mean? What does that look like? So I just found myself really scared, really sad and the reality of COVID and its impact on us, our ministry, and our family hit.
Mhm. So when that depression hit, I mean, I know the mental health field really well here. I know what supports are available, but what was available for you when you realized, like, ooh, this is depression? I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Um, I think normally I pride myself on having good friends. I think what was hard at that time is we were all going through it and
Yeah.
no one kind of knew what the answer was. No one, I think initially I was looking for someone to say, you guys need to come home. But no one was saying that.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. And so I wouldn't say I had a lot of resources until a counselor within Campus Crusade, she started offering a pandemic debrief journey for international missionaries.
Mm.
And I just had built trust with her from previous experiences. And I thought, I need to do this.
Yeah.
And I signed up for it. It was for 10 days. It was a 10-day debrief journey right in the middle of COVID. So it was right kind of when at the beginning, it was in May that I took it. And it really just helped me recenter on the Lord, recenter on how to kind of walk through the pandemic. And I still, to this day, lean on the principles that I learned from that 10-step debrief journey that I did.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more? Like, what were some of the principles of the program that you did?
I think initially she just had us build a timeline. And the timeline wasn't just a COVID timeline, but even what was going on for you before COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so you build a timeline of highs and lows from pre-COVID to COVID till now. And we actually had just moved, we had just moved our family to be closer to our kids' school right before everything shut down, which is wild. So we got to enjoy the carpool for 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, that didn't help very much.
I know, it was such a bummer, like the primary reason we moved and then everything closed. So we had moved. And so I think what was important about the timeline was just pausing and reflecting. I think it's easy just to keep going, but that pausing and writing out and drawing out the timeline was really helpful just to be and to remember. She also just walked us through how stress impacts our body.
Okay.
And it definitely, whether it's through emotions, physically, for me, it's just my brain. I feel like I can't retain as much information. I can't remember as much as the brain fog.
Yep.
But it was helpful just to acknowledge it. And we did all of this in a Facebook group. So after she would kind of go through a lesson, we would then write our responses to how we are handling stress or what are the observations from our timeline. And then it was super encouraging to read what other people were experiencing and then have people respond. And it just helped that aloneness. You're like, I'm not alone in this.
So these are people from all over the world, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was doing it with women I didn't know, but who were all overseas somewhere.
Everybody was willing to be vulnerable because you're experiencing different things depending on your context, but we're all going through this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to not feel so alone and helpful and realize other people were feeling similar things.
Yeah.
But the one session that probably ministered to me the most was on paradox and mystery. And just recognizing that during this time, we're going to feel both loss and thankfulness. So like I said, at the beginning, I felt thankful that all my family was together. We were getting this extra time.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of loss in community, loss in taking my kids to school, dropping them off. There was loss and we actually lost a student. So like I told you, we sent our students home. And so we lost a student in transit while he was going home
to COVID.
Back to India. Right? Yeah, to COVID. He died of COVID in India on his way back to India. He wasn't even home yet. His wife had two young kids. And I think that really scared all of us because that just said, wow, once you go out into the real world, you might get it and die. Look what happened. And so it really made it real quick. So just processing loss, but also there were things, just the feelings of paradox that I felt. And then the mystery of God. And there's still a lot of mystery for me, and being okay that I don't have all the answers, and being okay that I won't always understand what God is doing. And I can put that and just process the mystery of where it's a mystery to me still. Why is COVID still so rampant in the Philippines? And why did this happen? And there's still loss. So we did a whole session on loss and grief and processing loss. And then even memorializing is finding something to remember the season. This has been a significant season in all of our lives. And so it's important to memorialize and And then the last session, which is important for international missionaries, because when we come home, you're never sure what to share with people,
Yeah.
who really wants to know what life is like and who
What
just
can they
wants to
handle?
hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who just wants to hear God's good, And so she had a whole session on just helping us have like a 1 minute answer, the 10-minute answer, and then making sure you have a friend who really wants to hear the whole story.
Yeah.
And so it really just helped ground me back with the Lord and
Mhm.
ground me spiritually to keep walking with God in the midst of the pandemic. And it ministered to me so much. And I also did it with a buddy, which was important.
Oh, good.
So a good friend of mine, I asked her to join it. And so we did it together.
Mhm.
And then we would talk every week about what we were learning.
Yeah.
And so
So
that was
important.
helpful. And then we did it for our kids. We then took the sessions and did it with our kids, which was great.
Good. Now, I know you said in a previous conversation that once you had that and you felt like that newness of, understanding what you're going through and then being able to process through it, that you wanted to pass it on, not just to your kids, but to other women too. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, like I said, we sent our students home and we lost one of our own. That's how I say it.
Yeah.
Like those
Family
students had
member.
been, yeah, a family member. They had been living locked down on our campus for 3 months all together, and it was a bonding time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it felt like we had lost a family member. And then we're also sending our women home in the middle of their program, right? Like, so they all our first year students had another year of program left. And so I just felt like I wanted to do right by them. I wanted to give them an opportunity to process what that transition was like, leaving IGSL, going back to their home country in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like the Lord really showed me that these principles were a way that I could do right by them. Like I could bless them and honor their whole journey.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of my highlights of, I've gotten to do some really neat things in the
Mhm.
last 7 years and seeing the Lord show up in some neat ways. But this is probably the thing that I'm most grateful that God gave me the privilege to do, is to walk these women through this pandemic debrief,
Yeah.
because they needed it and they don't have the tools like we
Yeah.
have access to tools. They
Mhm.
don't have someone teaching them about grief. They don't have someone teaching them about paradox and the mystery of God and
Mhm.
how to hold them together.
Mhm.
So it was just an honor to get to walk them through it, and they needed it. They
Yeah.
needed it.
Yeah. So in our context here in America, even if you're not following Christ, you have sort of like a contextual understanding of Christianity or of who God is in some way. And so people coming from these other cultures and countries are don't even have that like basic understanding of how God operates in the world. So even though the people in your program do, they're following Christ and they want to bring Christ back to their countries, they're going back into a context where grief might be expressed totally differently, or ideas about even depression or soul care would be totally different. So you're giving them a context for that.
Yes, for sure. There's a lot of shame in the Asian culture. And so
Hmm.
mental health, I would put in that category.
Hmm.
There's not a lot of, you don't talk about it, you just kind of absorb it.
Yeah.
Even like in pre-COVID, I would teach a conflict class, how to have healthy conflict, godly
Hmm.
conflict. And that's all very new for them, learning how to handle conflict in a godly, healthy way. And so, yeah, we're giving them tools that they just don't have access to. And it does change the family dynamic because they're
Hmm.
now starting to relate in new ways.
Yeah.
And the heart of the counselor, when she walked us through the pandemic, was to pass this information on.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to me to see that I just passed it on to all these women and they took it and ran. They used it too because they
Mhm.
saw how much it helped them. And so they were using it. And so and then a coworker just started, she just took it all and is doing it for women in India because India
Mm.
is doing really bad in COVID right
Right.
now. And she has a lot of women who are hurting. And so
Mhm.
she is now running the program for women in India. So it's
Mhm.
been amazing for me to see how God has used just the simple steps to help people really with mental health. And
Yeah.
it's so needed right now.
So this kind of reminds me of when I was in college and you and the other crew staff were teaching me about spiritual multiplication and how if I reached somebody in my dorm, then that person would go on and reach somebody else. And that's how we win for the kingdom of God. Like that
Yes.
there's, it's not just you, it's the people that you reach in your sphere of influence, and then that spreads. And so it's kind of cool to hear you talk about this, because now mental health is my field. And you're showing me how it's not just about like telling people about Jesus, but it's about bringing some of these resources, because Jesus wants us to be healthy and whole and healed. And so
Yes.
we can bring that in that sense of multiplication as well.
No, I love that you made that comparison to spiritual multiplication, because in my mind, we are bringing the gospel
Mm-hmm.
with these tools. Like I was teaching these women an evangelism class right when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And so I was finishing that evangelism class on Zoom. And I remember saying to them, you guys, the whole world has something in common. The whole world has walked
Mm-hmm.
through COVID.
Yeah.
And you have a natural entry point with every single person to just say, gosh, tell me how COVID impacted you.
Mm-hmm.
How did that impact your view of God?
Yeah.
What is your view of God? Like there are so many avenues to the gospel now just through the pandemic.
Can
And
literally
then,
talk to anyone, right?
right? Like how unique is that? Like it's
Yeah.
not, I would never have hoped or wished it was a pandemic that bonded everyone, but you can go anywhere and connect with someone over it.
Mm-hmm.
And with the tools of this mental health, you could actually help someone walk through it and them see the Lord in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm with it's, to me, it's just, it is a way of sharing our faith and sharing the gospel
Mm-hmm.
and offering them soul care. I mean, that's what we ended up calling the class, soul care.
Soul care. I love that, because that's actually, the name of the podcast is Soul Grit, because it, like, our soul is the part that ties into our heart, mind, spirit. Like all the basic functions of humanity is tied up in your soul. And this, we talk about our souls being, saved to be with Jesus in eternity, that kind of thing. But it is functioning here. And what we learn, but even before going through a pandemic, what we learn is we have to have grit. You have to have resilience and strength to persevere. And we get that from our relationship with God. So that's the point of this. So I always ask people, like, what do you do for soul care? And, people have different responses for that. But this is a whole program that was dedicated to soul care.
Yes.
And teaching that. That's really cool. So, just having been an international missionary for all this time, and being a stateside missionary before that for the last 21 years, what do you think it's like for missionaries that are serving overseas to need counseling, to need therapy?
Well, it depends. Are you talking about American, like American missionaries?
Yeah, that's our context basically. So like when you see your colleagues go out to other places and then they encounter hard things, because I know once you're serving the kingdom in this way, like your marriage is attacked, your parenting is attacked, your finances, your health, like all of these different things become so difficult that most of us that stay here in the States, and even if we're serving in ministry, we don't have that same level of difficulty and separation from our loved ones. So how have you seen those needs met, or maybe they're not?
I actually think it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really hard, and it's been magnified because of the pandemic. And so that's a grief point for me, or a part of loss is just watching our friends. Really, we're all struggling, trying to discern what does God want for all of us now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was telling people, like Brian and I were not questioning living there or our calling at all pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
We were loving what we were doing. We were thankful to be there. Our kids were thriving. And so now to find ourselves kind of hanging in the balance, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so my heart and desire is to now kind of, even with the moms of my kids' friends or other families, I guess, serving in the Philippines, I want to ask them, like, let's start processing together. Like, what are we thinking about going back? How are you handling it? What do you feel like you need going back? What I feel like we need to all kind of unite
Mhm.
and get talking together
Mhm.
because we need each other.
Yeah.
Essentially, we really need each
Mhm.
other if we're going to keep walking through this pandemic together in Manila.
Mhm.
So I guess what I'm ultimately saying is community. We need
Yeah.
community and connection and vulnerability and honesty.
Mhm.
Because I think it's been hard on every family, on every marriage, on every kid. We've all been displaced and disrupted.
Mhm. When you already live kind of a disruptive life.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Like
I
we talked
appreciate you recognizing that, Anne.
we talked about Kaylin, your youngest, being like the true third culture kid of your family because your older two were older when you moved out of the United States. But she was a toddler when you went there, right?
Yes,
And she's
she was two
grown
years
up.
old. Yes.
Yeah, she's grown up in that culture. And so she doesn't really remember anything different except for times that you've been back.
Mhm.
So the disruption of each family member's life is like at a different kind of like a different point, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's hard. As a mom, it's hard to
Mhm.
navigate. It's hard to walk through. I think I think increasingly over time, my kids were identifying more third culture, but this
Mhm.
round being back, we definitely feel it the most.
Yeah.
We don't know what's in style clothing wise. We don't know. Like my son just went to youth group and they were all on TikTok and we're not on TikTok.
Yeah.
And so there's just someone asked my daughter, does she have a cell phone number they can call? And no, she doesn't have a phone. So it's the most the only best way to describe it, it's like we're in a fishbowl and we are looking out. Like we're
Mhm.
watching and we kind of belong out there, but we kind of don't. Like,
Mhm.
um,
Although
and
I do
this
have to say, if Colin gets a TikTok, I'm going to follow him.
he would be fun
He's
on
a
TikTok.
funny kid. Yeah.
And you heard him share at church.
Mhm.
He talked about paradox, which I love
Mhm.
because he got that from when we took the kids through the soul care. He learned about paradox. And
Yeah.
so that was my fun moment when he used that on his own. I love that.
And I loved when he said, I'm, what's the word? An extrovert. That's the word, right? And we're like, yes, Colin, you are an extrovert. Everybody can tell.
Definitely,
That's cute.
definitely. And it's been hardest on him. The
Yeah.
pandemic's been hardest on him for
Because
sure.
he's an
Because
extrovert.
yes, and he learns with others, right? Like that's how he learns. And
Mhm.
so when you think we've been doing this for a year and a half, as all of you in the
Mhm.
US have, it's been hard.
Yeah.
But yes, we definitely feel the third culture the most now than we've ever felt it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. So, um, if somebody else wanted to have access to this soul care debrief, the pandemic debrief, is it out there for anybody, or you have to actually, be a crew missionary serving overseas?
They could get it through you. I could give you the outline, um, and they could get it, I think, through you.
Okay.
Now I took the outline, and also when I did it, she had teaching videos
Mm-hmm.
and that went along with it, and
Mm-hmm.
we had worship songs that went
Oh.
along. So it was kind of like a step process. Like you would watch her teaching video, and then the worship video, and then she would have an activity, and then a
Mm-hmm.
processing activity.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a community based program.
Yeah.
It's really
Mm-hmm.
more beneficial to do with someone
Mm-hmm.
rather than on your own. But I think you could benefit on your own also. So I could send you the notes and the outline and you would have access to that. The teaching videos I can't send out,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Maybe I'll get in contact with that counselor and see if she's going
yeah,
to offer it to anybody else. And that'd be great. Are
yeah.
there any other resources or anything that you think it has been helpful for people in your situation? I know it's kind of unique, but
I mean, I really do think the community piece and processing with others, because it's funny, I did this pandemic debrief when I was in Manila, and I was doing it with missionaries who had come home in the US. And so it was interesting hearing them process like living with other people and living out of a suitcase. And so it actually kind of gave me a window into what my life would look like when I came back. And
yeah,
that's me now.
that's what it looks like now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just say if you have interest or if you're struggling, really it's important to allow the space. It's
Mhm.
really space to allow yourself to process and to reflect and to kind of be guided through the feelings and guided through what's going on and be reflected, but also to do it with someone.
Yeah.
So you're not so alone. Because I think the pandemic has caused a lot of aloneness.
Well, I know that there's a lot of people who have lost relationships during this time or have lost their church community during this time. And so they might feel like there's really nobody that I could reach out to go through this with. So, I mean, that's where professionally I would come in and say, well, you could get a Christian counselor,
Yeah.
like I'll walk through it with you. I know other people who are mental health professionals who are dedicated to Jesus that would walk this with you. And so sometimes when you can't find the community that you need in your natural life, you
Yes.
you go find it professionally for a while.
Yes.
And sometimes that's the step that you need to be able to re-enter like at a healthy level, like find your community, find your people again, because
Yeah.
you've been broken and wounded and you need somebody to walk alongside you to kind of bind you up and get you ready for your next launch.
No, that's a great way to say it. And I think a counselor was the one who started this,
Yeah.
right? Like I couldn't have got there on my own. I wasn't getting there on my own. I wasn't getting there even within my community in the Philippines. I needed a counselor's help,
Mm-hmm.
and she helped guide us through it. And it was significant, and I will be forever thankful.
Yeah, it's both and, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And honestly, and my heart would be, even as I'm sending my kids back into youth group and programs, is I would love to see youth workers acknowledging the mental health with kids.
Yeah.
I would love for them to be talking about how the pandemic has impacted them and their
Yes.
views of God.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a miss if we just go on as normal, if we just have youth group and play games and talk about, give a talk. I think there's an opportunity to really minister and bless and honor what we've all just walked through.
Yeah.
Because again, collectively, the world has. And so every single person has been impacted by this.
That's
And
a really
so
good idea. I think we need to find somebody for me to interview on that topic.
I love that. I'll listen. I will be
Okay.
there.
Or maybe you
Because,
can hook me up with somebody.
well, I have yet to see, my kids have been to two different churches and they've got some amazing workers, but I've yet to see anyone really ministering into that. Because I feel like kids would feel seen. They've been impacted by this too. Everyone has been.
Well, it's just another form of trauma. Like we have had a global trauma. And like you said, you can't talk to one person who hasn't been impacted by this. And so one of the things that I'm starting to see come up is that like we talk about trauma informed care. So as a counselor, I need to know how trauma works in your body and how that plays out in your life if I'm going to be sensitive to what you really need in therapy. It's the same in ministry. So whether you're a youth pastor or a senior pastor, or you work in a church office, or you're in a parachurch ministry or a missionary, whatever it is, like you need to be trauma informed at this point. Like even pre-pandemic, it was becoming more known that this was a need in ministry. And now that we're hopefully getting towards post-pandemic, like this is going to be a training that ministers need at all levels. Right?
Yes.
So.
No, and I have seen a few counselors in my day, and I can tell with how you are talking and connecting to me, you're good, Anne, at what you do.
Thank you, Christine.
I can hear it. I can hear it. And your sensitivity and awareness, and I appreciate it. I really do.
It takes all sorts of different experiences, right? Like a couple of years ago, I got trained in EMDR so that I would understand the whole first part of getting that training is just understanding what trauma is and what it does to your body. And then you learn the techniques to kind of clear it out. And so like that of all things that I've done in the last 10 years probably was one of those turning points where I'm like, oh, okay, I understand the world differently now. And so being able to combine that with what you know about Jesus's healing power and the power of the gospel, it's like, it's dynamite. I'm going to say that over and over again on this podcast, right?
I love it. No, I totally agree with you. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
It is. And I want more people to have access to that. So what you're doing, you're spreading it, you're multiplying. I'm hoping to multiply here through the airwaves.
I love
And,
it. I love it.
yeah.
I respect and appreciate your heart. And I experienced that when I was with your family, and I experienced your heart for the Lord and wanting others healing. Essentially, you want healing with the gospel. And
Yeah.
to me, that is the power of the gospel. That is the beauty. And yeah, I love it. And when I look back, honestly, when I look back at when I was at Stanford with you, and I was at Cal Poly Slow before that, how I shared the gospel, it was real to me at the time, but I would share it so differently now.
Yeah.
In a much more meaningful, it just wouldn't be the 4 laws. It would just
almost
be way
more sensitive, right?
Yeah, more sensitive, empathetic, thoughtful, and wanting to understand people. I mean, people are complicated, have complicated stories.
Yeah.
And where is God showing up in that story? I think would be more my approach now.
Yeah.
Than just God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, which is true, but it would just look very different.
I mean, like when you say that God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, I get goosebumps because it was so formative for me during that time, just to have a tool. But I haven't gotten out the booklet in probably 15 years or more, because your story is so much more important in relationship. And even with people you don't know, as you were saying, you can ask anybody, what's your pandemic experience been? And now you have an entry point. Or yesterday at the park with the kids, all I said to another mom was, your little girl is so adorable. And we got to talking. She ended up praying for me. Yeah, it was, but you can, I would look for other opportunities to pray for somebody else, but it was really blessing to me that you can just, at the grocery store. Okay, a lot of people can't do this, but extroverts can do this, right?
Yes.
I can talk to people at the grocery store, but even if you're not that type of person that's going to go up and talk to strangers, you have something that you can connect with people on, and that's how you're going to win people for the kingdom.
Right. And like we've said, people have been isolated and alone and are craving connection, and not just, I don't think small talk, they're just craving to be seen. Right.
Yeah.
And so such a simple avenue. Yes, but I'm an extrovert, so it is easier for me than my introverted husband.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of avenues now to talk about the Lord and to talk about the gospel in a meaningful way that connects to someone and their journey. I think the pandemic, has caused a lot of loss and a lot of suffering, but I think God can use it for good too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you, this is kind of maybe redundant because of our conversation, but I always ask a guest, what are you doing for soul care?
That is a great question. I talked to my friend who's a counselor, actually. She's a trauma counselor. I just got off the phone with her before I talked to you. So we talk once a week. And honestly, that has blessed me a ton. I'm reading a book. I'm trying to, I'm a reactive person, and I like to make things happen. And right now, God has me in a place of just waiting. Our family doesn't know if we're going back to the Philippines or not. And I don't do very good at that. And so I'm just trying to wait, stay connected to the Lord and to people. I would say that's what I'm doing. That is what I'm doing.
So in the waiting, you said you're reading a book.
Yes.
You're staying connected with your people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm working hard actually right now to help my kids get reconnected.
Yeah.
And that's probably taking most of my energy, is just helping them. Because it's not easy. It's hard. It's hard to re-enter back into a world as a third culture kid. So
yeah. Well, I texted you this, but after we met with you guys a couple of weeks ago, my daughter said, when are they coming to our house? So I know that you have a 10-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. And so according to my 11-year-old, the invitation is open for coming to hang out and be friends.
We would love to come. If you know anyone who needs a house sitter, we
I
can
know,
definitely
I know.
come.
Yeah, I'm like, we should just leave our house so they could use our house. So funny.
And you would need a house, but yes, if you
I'll
know
just
anyone
go
who
live
needs,
with my mom.
that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, well, Christina, it's been so nice to reconnect with you and to have this conversation that I'm really hoping will bless different people, because we just don't know who's listening and what situation they're in, and what is going to spark hope in them. And so that's really what we're here for, is to spread more hope through the gospel and through mental health. And so thank you for being here.
No, I appreciate, and I appreciate you reaching out to us and just reconnecting. I've enjoyed it a lot. It has blessed me. So thanks.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.